a special pleasure that we may welcome here our today's speaker, Dr. Sonya Koshkina, which is her pen name, as you may know. Her civic name is Sonya Koshkina, if I may reveal that. Dr. Koshkina is a lecturer at Taras Shevchenko Kyiv National University, from which she also holds a doctorate in social communications. And she is currently a visiting professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences of our university. She was born in Kyiv, and before and along with her academic work, she has been active as a journalist in both printed and electronic media, among other things as a political and religious columnist. In 2015, she published in Ukrainian and Russian, if I'm not mistaken, a widely circulated book called Maidan, an Untold Story, which presents a thorough investigation of the events of the so-called Revolution of Dignity. After the 24th of February 2022, she temporarily moved to Prague, where he also works for Radio Ukraine. She has a program called An Hour with Sonya Koshkina. She writes also for Czech media, to the Deník newspaper, and she works for the Information Defense Hub Analytical Center. She gave lectures at Masaryk University and Central European University. For Jota Publishing House, she is now authoring a book dealing with the changes that took place in Ukrainian society after the beginning of the Great War. Her lecture for today bears the title Ukrainian Orthodoxy after Russia's great invasion of Ukraine. Dr. Koshkina, we are looking forward to what you have to say to us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this invitation. It's a great honor for me to be here. So let's speak about Ukrainian Orthodoxy after the Great Invasion. February 24 caused tectonic changes in all spheres of life of the Ukrainians, including religion. It is everywhere the religious environment in Ukraine is usually quite conservative. It takes years and decades for changes to happen. But now, in just 1 year, things have happened in the Ukrainian Orthodoxy that under the normal circumstances would take much, much longer. Starting with the formal renunciation by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, its connection with the Russian Orthodox Church, and to the establishment of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, its own monastery in the main shrine of our country, Kyivo-Pecherska Lavra. All these events were reported in detail by the Ukrainian online media LBUA, Levy Bereg. Here is the main page on English, which I lead. In March 2022, I planned to create a new section of our website, Religion, to cover all relevant events as much details as possible. But the war interfered these plans. Its potential editor left to serve in the armed forces. But in fact, such a section does exist. You may see its main page and 3 main articles. It's about church. It's just that it does not have the separate page on our website, but similar to other sections like news department, but it exists. Without much exaggeration among the large Ukrainian online media, my LB writes about religion the most. 90% of these texts are mine. I want to emphasize, I am not a theologian. I am not a theologian scientist. I don't have a professional education as you. I am a journalist, and I defend my PhD thesis, as here was mentioned, in the field of social communications. I teach journalism at Taras Shevchenko National University in Kyiv, here at Charles University, and in other European universities. However, it happens that religion was added to my main journalistic profile, political analysis. Me personally, I came to the church 15 years ago in Kyiv. I personally know all the key players of the Ukrainian Orthodoxy. I witnessed all its main events, starting with the attempts of Viktor Yanukovych to force the late primate of Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate, Metropolitan Vladimir Sabodan, to resign from the leadership of the church, which I explain in detail in my first book, Maidan Untold Story. Later, I witnessed the Unification Council, the granting of Thomas to Ukraine, and the creation of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. I studied canon law and the basic of theology on my own. Although I don't have such deep expertise as you, but my approach is more journalistic. That is why I am here today. I will take the liberty of telling you about the radical changes that took place in the Ukrainian Orthodoxy after the Great Invasion. So we'll start, and let's start with numbers. The Unification Council, the decision of which established the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, was held in Kyiv on December 15, 2018. The Ukrainian Autocephalous Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kyiv Patriarchate, which were self-dissolved in this day, became the basis of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Representatives of Moscow Patriarchate were also invited to participate in the council. At least 10 bishops were expected to arrive, but only 2 showed up. It was Metropolitan Alexander Drabinko and Metropolitan Simeon from Vinnytsia. Immediately after the council, communities from the Moscow Patriarchate began to join the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Our Orthodox community in Kyiv was the first. It's really, we are proud about it. But this process was not fast. From the beginning of 2019 to the beginning of 2022, a total about 600 parishes were transferred, only 600 parishes. For this, a decision of the community adopted by the majority at its general meeting is necessary, so nothing complicated. But after the February 24, the number of transitions increased sharply. It happens that 3-5 communities moved on a single day, despite the fact that some representatives of the authorities tried to block them. I will talk about it a little bit later. As for now, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has a little over 8,000 parishes. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine Moscow Patriarchate has less than 800,000 parishes. I give approximately figures, since exact statistics are not kept during the big war. In addition, many communities of the Moscow Patriarchate exist only on paper, and some of them remain on the temporary occupied territories. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which began back in 2014, the Moscow Patriarchate was the largest religious organization in Ukraine and had about 12,000 parishes. After the Russian occupation of Crimea and Ukrainians temporarily lost a part of Donbass, a little more than 10,000 parishes were left. Now the numerical advantage is already on the side of Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and the process is continuing. It should be noted that since the very beginning, the Moscow Patriarchate was extremely hostile to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Representatives of this church call its creation illegal, illegitimate, and non-canonical. Of course, it's absolutely not true. As you know, Orthodox Church of Ukraine is included in the diptych of the local world churches. In 2018, immediately after the Unification Council, the Russian Orthodox Church announced the break in canonical communion with the Patriarchate of Constantinople, and her daughter, Moscow Patriarchate, supported this decision. At the Council of May 27, 2022, at which the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate announced that it was severing ties with the Russian Orthodox Church, this decision they also confirmed. Next step, how did Ukrainian Orthodoxy meet the Great War? On the day of the Great Invasion, the head of the Moscow Patriarchate, Metropolitan Onufry was in the native Bukovina, it's a west part of Ukraine, but urgently returned to Kyiv. In his statement, he spoke about Russia's war against Ukraine and the scene of fratricide. The statement was unusually sharp for him. Unfortunately, soon Metropolitan Onufry stopped calling the war a war Russia, it's perpetrate Russia, and giving preferences to some abstract wording, just some war. Allow me quote from our interview with the new head of the State Service of Ethnopolitics, Viktor Yelensky. In this Ukrainian system of government, this service is something like the Ministry of Religion. So, his quote: "It was such a shocking statement." Statement of Metropolitan Onufry. Obviously, he considered the Russians as brothers, obviously emitted some signals that there would be no invasion. Many speakers of this church spoke about this. Of course, he could not help but react to the despair of those priors who were under the fire. All this was in the first days of the war, but it seems to me that Yelensky that clergy of this church gradually recovered, and in their rhetoric, the main enemy again became the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and Patriarch Bartholomew. It's the end of the quote. There were no fluctuations in the position of the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Metropolitan Epiphany. It was always absolutely pro-Ukrainian. Like President Zelensky, he did not leave Kyiv with the war started, despite the fact that Epiphany, like many other political, church, public leaders, volunteers, activists, and journalists, was on the Russian so-called black lists. Lists for capture and physical extermination. I was also in this blacklist, like a journalist, why in fact I had to leave Kyiv. The residence of Metropolitan Epiphany St. Michael's Gold Dome Cathedral in the same center of Kyiv was several times attacked by the so-called DRG, subversive intelligence groups that were sent into the city on the eve of the Great Invasion. It should be understood that St. Michael's Gold Dome Cathedral is a complex of monastic buildings which was founded in 12th century. That is, the monastery is very well fortified. It's not so easy to attack these buildings, believe me. The Bolsheviks destroyed the main buildings in 13th, but it took several attempts to blow them up. At the beginning of 21st century, the entire complex was rebuilt. Just now, it's the main residential of Metropolitan Onufry and Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine. During the events of the Revolution of Dignity, monastery played a very important role. On the night of November 30 to December 1st, 2013, when especially security forces called Berkut beat peaceful student protesters on the Maidan, bells rang in the monastery to wake up the townspeople. This was the second time in the history of monastery of Kyiv. The first time it was in 13th century during the Tatar-Mongolian invasion. On the morning of December 1st, the beaten students were hidden in Mikhailivsky, and the townspeople came to the square in front of the monastery. During the events of the Revolution of Dignity, a hospital was opened there directly in front of the altar. The Russians planned to destroy another important shrine, the ancient cathedral of the St. Sophia of Kyiv, which is located opposite to the St. Michael's Golden Dome, maybe 6 hundreds meters away. A relevant statement was made on March 1st, 2022 by the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches. But St. Sophia survived. Third, how did the Great Invasion affect the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate? The crisis in the middle of Moscow Patriarchate began long before the Great Invasion, mainly due to a reluctance to recognize the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the reluctance to peacefully coexist, to conduct inter-church dialogue. The absolutely majority of the upper clergy of Moscow Patriarchate have very pro-Russian views, which they have never hidden. They studied and worked in Russia, maintained contacts with their elder brothers in the Russian Orthodox Church. About half of them also have Russian passports, which is expressly prohibited by Ukrainian legislation. At the same time, there are many ordinary priors in the Moscow Patriarchate who are patriots and absolutely pro-Ukrainian. After February 24, they refused to commemorate in liturgy the Patriarch Kirill, who directly blessed Russian generals for killing Ukrainians. The voice of such priors became Andrei Pinchuk, the rector of a village church, really in a small village in the Dnipropetrovsk region. It's a south part of Ukraine, southeast, if correctly. It was him to initiate the collection of signatures of his colleagues under the open letter to the ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. The essence of the appeal is convenience the court of Pentarchy for Patriarch Kirill Gundyaev, who is the main author of the Russian world ideology, which has become murderous. The appeal fell on prepared ground because talks about possibility trial of the Pentarchy for Kirill were held at the end of 2022, I think you remember, in connection with the Russian Orthodox Church invasion on the canonical territory of Alexandria Patriarchate, as if to protect the interests of believers, in fact, as a revenge for the fact that Alexandria recognized Orthodox Church of Ukraine. As I mentioned, the Russian Orthodox Church, together with the Moscow Patriarchate, to which Pinchuk belongs, broke the canonical communion with Constantinople. But Father Andrei's act was rather a political position. It's our interview, we wrote it on 1 year ago, on April, and the title is "We are waiting for the clergy to decide whether they are with Ukraine or with Kirill and Putin." I think everything is clear from this title. The situation inside the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Russian Orthodox Church was increasingly aggravating, and its leadership could not help but react, especially after the bishops who went over to the side of the enemy and became collaborators began to appear mass graves in the occupied territories of Kyiv, Kherson, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, and other regions. A council was convened on May 27, which became historic for the Moscow Patriarchate. Next, a council of May 27. The council on May 27 was held not in Kyivo-Pecherska Lavra as usual, but in the residence of Metropolitan Onufry in Feofania. The decision of the council was also prepared personally by Onufry, who did not allow his closest associate, Metropolitan Antony Pakanich, to participate in the process. Who, among other things, in the main pro-Russian hawk, I mean Antony Pakanich, the main pro-Russian hawk in the Ukrainian Church, Moscow Patriarchate. The council's decision came as a surprise for Pakanich, also for the main donor of Moscow Patriarchate, former citizen of Russia and former pro-Russian politician in Ukraine, Vadim Novinsky. Also for the abbot of Kyivo-Pecherska Lavra, Pavlo Lebedь. Some of those present, such as Novinsky, immediately accused Onufry of creating a schism with Russian Orthodox Church. Some, as Metropolitan Luka from Zaporizhia, were blackmailing by saying that they would leave the meeting and disrupt the quorum. So what happened? The main decision of the Council of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine on May 27, 2022 was the editing its own statute from which all references to the Russian Orthodox Church were removed. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church announced that it's getting rid of the MP appendix and henceforth an independent church. As the main argument in favor of this, the representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate referred to the decree of 1919, which Patriarch Alexei II issued to the then head of the Kyiv Church, Filaret Denisenko. This decree does provide broad rights, it's true, provide broad rights in matters of management and administration of the Kyiv Church, but this is definitely not synonymous with its independence. And definitely it's not Thomas. The term independent church does not exist in the Orthodox canon law, to which all word orthodoxy is subject. Autocephalous, autonomous, yes, but certainly not independent. It should be also noted, it's very important, that the Moscow Patriarchate cannot declare itself autocephalous. The word autocephaly was never had at the Council of May 27. If this were to happen, the Moscow Patriarchate would follow the path of the Kyiv Patriarchate. The Kyiv Patriarchate was created by Filaret after the death of Patriarch Pimen in 1919, when he failed to get the position of the head of the entire Russian Orthodox Church. The Kyiv Patriarchate played an important role in the modern history of Ukraine, especially political role, but the world Orthodoxy never recognized it. And the Moscow Patriarchate constantly reminded the Kyivsky Patriarchate about its not canonically. As I have already mentioned, the Kyiv Patriarchate was dissolved by the signature of Filaret on the day of Unification Council in December 2018. But let's return to the Council on May 27 last year. As we can see, its decision was manipulative. Changes to the statute were not officially published for a very long time. In the case of a real change in the status of the church, Metropolitan Onufry should have to send so-called peace letters, messages to the heads of local churches. But he did not do this because, in fact, no changes took place, only in words. Yes, from the now on, the Moscow Patriarchate stopped commemorating Patriarch Kirill, but Onufry himself still continued to pray on his anti-means, Kirill anti-means, I mean. That is, the name is not pronounced out loud, but in fact through the head of Moscow Patriarchate. All members of this church continue to be with Kirill in canonical union. Metropolitan Onufry, as well as his right-hand man, Metropolitan Antony Pakanich, continue to be formally part of Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church. Yes, they don't go to its meetings, and it's impossible now, but there is nominal membership remains. That is, the main task of the Council on May 27 was to let off steam. Later on, high-ranking representatives of Moscow Patriarchate, for example, Mykola Danilevich, would say more than once that by the end of the Great War, serious changes in their church should not be expected. By the way, in the decision of the Council, there is... By the way, in the decision of the Council, there is no single word about Russians' attack on Ukraine, just condemnation of some kind of abstract war. Instead, there was a call to the authorities of Ukraine and Russia Federation to continue the negotiation process, which was interrupted after the revelation of the atrocities committed by the Russians in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, and other Ukrainian cities. Here is Metropolitan Epiphany in Borodyanka. It's the first day after liberation. And he came in Borodyanka firstly, then President Zelensky. And in that time, everything was mined around. But not everyone agreed with, not everyone in Moscow Patriarchate agreed with diplomatic maneuver of Metropolitan Epiphany. Literally, the next day, all Crimean parishes of the Moscow Patriarchate declared the disagreement with the decision of the council and asked for the homophorion of Moscow. The decision of the Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church on June 7 granted this request, and the Crimea metropolis of the Russian Orthodox Church was established on the peninsula. The Moscow Patriarchate did not react to these events in any way, absolutely in any way. The Crimean Metropolitan Lazar was not formally blamed of such action. Next. Security Service of Ukraine against Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The summer of 2022 was relatively calm for the Ukrainian Orthodox at all. Those who wanted to believe in the sincerity of Metropolitan Onufry intentions to break with Moscow were comforted by the official announcements of the May Council. They ignored all the above-mentioned arguments. Part of the community separated from the Moscow Patriarchate but did not reach the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. They remained to be in the gray zone. But most of those parishes that wanted to join the Orthodox Church of Ukraine faced serious bureaucratic obstacles, especially in the Kyiv region. The reason for this became clear in September 2022. It was then that LB received a letter from my own sources, a letter from the then deputy head of the Security Service of Ukraine in the Kyiv region, Yuri Palahniuk. In this letter, Palahniuk directly ordered his subordinates to block the transition of parishes from Moscow Patriarchate to Orthodox Church of Ukraine in the capital region and to provide him all information about rebellious priors. After its publication, this letter, this information became widely publicized. A real scandal broke out and Palahniuk was dismissed from his position in less than a day. There was also a political reason, understandable, clear. After the dismissal of the previous head of the security service, Ivan Bakanov, the service was temporarily managed by his deputy, Vasily Malyuk. He had all chances to become a full-fledged head of the SBU, which happened in February 2023. But for this, it was necessary to show good work results. Next part, crusade of the Security Service of Ukraine against collaborators in Kazakhs. From that moment, from September 2022, the Security Service began a real crusade against collaborators and agents of the enemy in Kazakhs. Searches and inspections have begun at all key facilities of the Moscow Patriarchate throughout the country. Anti-Ukrainian propaganda literature, symbols of Russia and a so-called Novorossiya were found almost everywhere. An analysis of the sermons, it's interesting, but in Moscow Patriarchate, still a lot of sermons delivered in Russian, not in Ukrainian or Old Slavic. Revealed numerous pro-Russian rhetoric. For example, a charge of inciting interreligious enmity was brought against the abbot of the men's monastery of Moscow Patriarchate in Kyivo-Pecherska Lavra, Pavlo Lebedь, for one of on these sermons. Russian passports were found in the offices of some metropolitans. One of them was Mileti Yegorenko from Chernivtsi, who, among other things, he is head of a Department of External Church Relationship in Moscow Patriarchate with Russian passport. Some figures were exposed as directly working for the enemy. Sus Metropolitan Yelisei Kupensky, Yeah, it's Yelisei Kupensky and Izumsky helped the so-called head of the temporary occupational administration in Kharkiv region, Roman Ganichev, in every possible way. He blessed him, he helped him, you may see it, and when Kharkiv Oblast was liberated, he fled to Russia with him, with Ganichev. Later, a week before the Great War, Bishop Serafim Zalesnitsky left the Ivano-Frankivsk diocese without explaining anything to anyone. Also, maybe you know that according to the statute of Moscow Patriarchate, the bishop cannot leave the diocese for more than 14 days without the special permission of the head of the church. He simply packed his things, his belongings, and left to Russia, where he was later seen serving in one of the monasteries. It was several days before the war. As is now clear, Serafim was warned about the invasion. In addition to the Crimean parishes, the Rovenki diocese in the Lugansk region and in Romny in the Sumy region also came under the omophorion of the Russian Orthodox Church. The leaders Yosif Maslenikov and Arkady Taranov also fled to Russia. More to come. On September 13, a solemn ceremony took place in the Moscow Kremlin. In the Moscow Kremlin, when the so-called new territories, Ukrainian lands, seized by the Russians, were incorporated to Russia. In addition to the Russian political establishment, the so-called governments of Kherson region, part of Zaporizhia region, the leaders of Donetsk Party Republic and Lugansk Party People Republic, their representatives from the Moscow Patriarchate were present in the hall. One of them was Metropolitan of Lugansk, Panteleimon Povoroznuk. The abbot of the central cathedral in Kherson, here is him, in Kherson, and the abbot of the monastery in Melitopol, Zaporizhia region, were also spotted. He had provided the premises of his monastery for the illegal referendum to be held by occupiers. If you think that Moscow Patriarchate somehow reacted to this, then no, absolutely any reaction. Later, those who fled to Russia were simply granted rest by the decision of Synod, granted rest without explaining the reason. Those who sat in Kremlin or were suspected by the SBU of treason in inciting ethnic and religious enmity were not even convicted. On the contrary, the Moscow Patriarchate began speaking about the alleged persecution of the church. Returning to the topic of searches, I cannot help but mention those that have gained the most publicity. The first case is in the Chernivtsi and Bukovinsky diocese, which is headed by the already mentioned Mileti Yegorenko. In addition to the Russian passport, Miletius' computers were searched and child pornography was found. According to the preliminary results of the examination, it wasn't downloaded from internet, but filmed on the spot. As on this moment, as of today, the case is almost finished and the driver of Mileti took all the blame. At the same time, a naked 70-year-old Horester boy was found in the neighboring office in the diocese secretary Nikita Starozhuk. Here is Nikita. Nikita tried to explain that SBU representatives allegedly undressed him on purpose and photographed him that way. Then he said that he went out of the room into the corridor after hearing some commotion and the naked teenager was running along the corridor. Later, a third version appeared, but from the beginning it was clear that Nikita was lying. And what already happened when he was caught red-handed. The only thing that saved him was that According to Ukrainian legislation, the age of consent comes at 16, and young man was 17, and he refused to write a statement about rape because he was afraid of Nikita's revenge. These events took place just a few days after the session of the Synod of Moscow Patriarchate in October, if I remember correctly, at which it was to concentrate Nikita as a bishop for Ivano-Frankivsk, which became vacant after Seraphim fled. If you think that that the scandal prevented Metropolitan Onufriy from consecrating Nikita as a bishop within a week, only a week, then you are also mistaken. As of today, Bishop Nikita Storozhuk heads the Ivano-Frankivsk diocese, under which there is only one Moscow Patriarchate parish, only one in whole region. And Ivano-Frankivsk is a big region in the west part of Ukraine. Another high-profile search took place at the end of November in Kyiv, Pechersk Lavra. As you know, almost all large monasteries have hotels for pilgrims. Kyiv, Pechersk Lavra is not exception. So, according to the results of a search in one of these hotels, several dozen young men with athletic physiques, supposedly pilgrims, with Russian passports and a distinct Russian accent, were found. Several others were found to have the fake Ukrainian passports. What these pilgrims were doing there, the abbot of Lavra, Pavlo Lebed, did not explain. All these facts shocked the Ukrainian society. I think you too know. Logically, a Moscow Patriarchate should have reacted to such episodes by itself, solving the problem on its own. However, Onufriy and his closest preferred to pretend that nothing extraordinary was happening, and they did not notice anything. But since the church issue in Ukraine ceased to be an internal matter of the believers and turned it to the national security issue, the state had to react. Next step, sanctions for collaborators in Kazakhs and deprivation of citizenship. By the end of 2022, 2 sanction lists against representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate were prepared and made public. The main thing that provides for personal sanctions is the blocking of personal accounts and assets. They were applied to the main donor of the Moscow Patriarchate, oligarch Vadim Novinsky. I mentioned about him, the abbot of Lavra, Pavlo Lebed, Luka from Zaporizhia, etc., and other metropolitans. Also, several dozen representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, whose Russian passports were found, were stripped of their Ukrainian citizenship. This became a particular nuisance for Mileti Yegorenko, who, according to his official duties, the head of the Department of External Relationship of Moscow Patriarchate, was supposed to travel around the world. But now he cannot cross the state border, as he will not be allowed back without Ukrainian passport. So, yeah, he may cross, but not in another way, only in one way. Several priors of Moscow Patriarchate who helped the enemy in the occupied territories were arrested and convicted and then sent to Russia for exchange. One of them, Father Andrei from Severodonetsk, was personally met at the border by the owner of the private military company Wagner, the so-called Putin's cook Yevgeny Prigozhin. Severodonetsk, it was a big city in the east of Ukraine, and just now it's completely destroyed. Father Andrei, who corrected the Russian artillery, is among those whom to blame for that. The future of Lavras, because we have not only one Lavra in Ukraine. The year 2023 began for Ukrainians with a historical event. Here is it. For the first time in 300 years, the Ukrainian Church returned to the Ukrainian Lavra. On Orthodox Christmas on the 7th of January, His Beatitude Epiphany presided over a solemn service in the main church of the shrine, the Assumption Cathedral. Thousands of people gathered in the church and in the courtyard, even those who don't belong to the church and never go to the services. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine is now not only about faith, but also about national consequences belonging to Ukraine and Ukrainians. At the end of 2022, the state terminated the contract of indefinite and free lease of the Upper Lavra with Moscow Patriarchate. I need to explain that the territory of monastery is divided in two parts, upper and lower. So at the end of 2022, the contract for Upper Lavra. This contract had been signed in 2013 during the time of President Viktor Yanukovych and Prime Minister Mykola Azarov. Basically, the Lavra is a UNESCO site and belongs to the state, not for the church, for the state. And there are a lot of museums on the territory of Lavra. This decision was political in 2013, and the contract itself was drawn up legally imperfectly, so only political will was needed to terminate it. By March 29, 2023, so less a week, representatives of Moscow Patriarchate must vacate the territory of Lower Lavra, where the monastery is located and where monastic life takes place. Here is noteworthy that in 2022, in Moscow Patriarchate had decided to create its, not Moscow Patriarchate, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, had decided to create its own men's monastery, the Assumption Monastery in the Kyiv Peczersk Lavra. Registration of monastery, it was a decision of Synod on May 2022, but registration of the monastery lasted 6 months, from May to December. In December, all formalities were finally completed, but as of now, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine monastery has no permanent prime sizes where monastic lives take place in Lavra. And when the state terminated the lease agreement of the Lavra with Moscow Patriarchate, there was no question that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine would move there immediately. No. But it's obviously obvious, I hope, that this will happen in some time, but not now, maybe later. Currently, His Beauty Epiphanius calls upon the monks of the Lavra who want to stay in the monastery to join the new established monastery of Ukrainian Orthodox Church and continue their obedience. For its part, Ukrainian authorities promise not to use force while evicting monks from the Lavra. It is worth nothing that, in addition to the largest Kyiv Peczerska Lavra, there are 2 more Lavras. Oh, sorry, it's my favorite picture. It's Pavlo Lebedь in the day, it's 7th of January. So we have two more Lavras in Ukraine, in the west Pechaevska and in the east Svetogirska. Both are also currently under the control of Moscow Patriarchate. Pechaevska until 2052, Svetogirska indefinitely. As in case of Kyiv-Peczerska Lavra, these contracts can be terminated. I would venture to admit that it will happen already this year. Ukrainian Greek Catholics claim their right to serve in Pechaev Lavra. As for Svetogirska, it is a young monastery in the Donetsk region which received the status of Lavra in 20 years ago, 18 years ago, thanks to the support of Viktor Yanukovych. In 2014, before the storming of the city of Slovyansk, which actually marked the occupation of eastern Ukraine by the Russians, Igor Girkin militants were hiding in this monastery in Svetogirska Lavra. They also stockpiled weapons there. In 2022, the Svetogirska Lavra suffered serious damage at the hands of the Russians. It's Kyiv-Peczerska Lavra. Okay. Instead of conclusions, in just 1 year, church life in Ukraine ceased to be an internal matter of those who are directly involved in, turning into a significant factor of state policy and, most important, security. Today, this process continues. As I said, very soon on March 29, the Moscow Patriarchate must finally leave the lower Lavra. On the instructions of President Zelensky, the Cabinet of Ministers developed a draft law that will significantly complicate the operational activities of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. The document is currently under consideration by the parliament. People call it the law on the prohibition of the Moscow Church, but it's not quite so. As you know, according to the constitution, Ukraine is a secular state. The process of amending of constitution is quite difficult, and during a martial law it's impossible. That is, simply taking and banning the church will not work, and especially since the church is not a legal entity. Its special status. Moreover, during the time of independence, no religious organization was ever banned in Ukraine. However, it's quite possible to impose certain restrictions of the economic activity of the church, what in fact is planned to be done. The reason is that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church maintains a canonical and actual connection with the aggressor state. This is evidenced in particular by the conclusions of an independent expert group formed by the State Security of Ethnopolitics. According to the procedure, the Cabinet of Ministers relies on this document when preparing its draft law. At the end of 2018, a law was passed that obligated all organizations operating on the territory of Ukraine but having a management center on the territory of the aggressor state, means Russia Federation, to indicate this in their name. The Moscow Patriarchate directly falls under its influence and therefore tried to challenge the law in the Supreme Court of Ukraine to avoid renaming. At the beginning of 2023, the Supreme Court gave the final answer. The law should apply in the form in which it was adopted, and the Moscow Patriarchate should be renamed. Of course, after the renaming, when a mention of a direct connection with the Russian Federation and Russian Orthodox Church will be added to the name, the number of parishioners will significantly decrease. Few serious change continue. You and I are witnesses of truly historical process. And at the end, and at the very end, I will add the following. Unfortunately, the Russian Orthodox Church, headed by the Patriarch Kirill, is a full accomplice in the crimes of Vladimir Putin regime. I think this fact is obvious and does not require additional argumentation. First, Kirill must answer for this personally. Second, after the victory of Ukraine and the disintegration of Russia into several smaller parts, I have no doubts that this will happen. Serious metamorphosis will take place within Russian Orthodox Church itself. At one time, the collapse of the Soviet Union began with democratic protests in the republics, Lithuania, Ukraine, and other ex-Soviet republics. We are witnessing something very strange now in the Russian Orthodox Church. The Latvian Orthodox Church had already severed ties with her. Yes, it was done with the help of the state in a rather controversial way, if true, but the fact itself is symptomatic. Lithuania is currently in the process of negotiation to grant it Tomos, as Ukraine received in 2018. So I think in a year we will have something to talk about again. Thank you for your attention.